Welcome to our channel, Gray Matters. We are two neurodivergent ladies who fixate and need to share, and we've created this channel to do just that. Check out our podcast, Fixate Today, Gone Tomorrow, for some deeper dives.
Today, we are talking about the ongoing corruption linked to our nation's handling of unaccompanied child immigrants at the U.S. border. This issue is both sensitive and divisive, and we're passionate about it, believing it transcends politics. While we hear a lot of political back and forth, I personally became fixated on this issue after wondering, where are these kids? And realizing that our traditional, overwhelmed foster system could not have absorbed hundreds of thousands of additional minors. We want to make it clear that the issue we are discussing in the video is very different from the issues going on in the country with mass deportations and the demonization of migrants. We are, by no means, in support of broad deportations, the weaponization of immigration laws, narrowing pathways to legal immigration, and the disruption of families and communities. The climate of fear that has been created will not help in locating and protecting children. It is also important to clarify that we are not implying that the main players in the Mica Miller case are necessarily directly involved. However, we cannot lose sight that large-scale organized crime and corruption involve many individuals playing independent roles, including money laundering and temporary housing of human trafficking victims.
We've talked a lot about trafficking in the Mica Miller case, but there is a glaring issue in the United States that we cannot ignore when discussing trafficking. We do our best to avoid discussing politics directly, as we want to be an inclusive space for positive, healthy discussions, and we are going to do our best to keep this video focused on factual evidence. Today, we are talking about non-government organizations, government policy, and unaccompanied minors. Let's define some terms for this video. First, a non-governmental organization, or an NGO, is a charity, service, participatory, empowerment, or professional union organization that share a goal in improving some element of life for people. These organizations can get governmental or corporate funding and are community-based, citywide, statewide, national, or international. These organizations are dependent on donations and volunteers. They can either be operational NGOs, which focus on the design and implementation of development-related projects, or advocacy NGOs, which defend or promote a cause. NGOs can be simple to set up, but it's more difficult to pursue tax-exempt status. The U.S. hosts a number of foreign NGOs, which are funded by foreign governments but are registered in the U.S.
An investigative reporter is that some of these NGOs really are not prepared to confront the complexity of migration and trafficking and mafias and all of that. Some of them are really good, nice, people that want to help children, and they don't know what they're facing. And once they...
Now let's talk about unaccompanied minors. We are talking about children who cross the border into the United States without a parent or guardian. Children who are doing this are most likely fleeing violence, attempting to reunite with a family member, or even escaping abuse or trafficking. Usually, the parents of these children find themselves in desperate situations and are trying to get their kids to safety.
The teens who ended up in Ohio began their journey here in the western highlands of Guatemala. One of the boys, who was 14 at the time, lived in this village. He worked with his father tending sugar cane for $1 a day. But then one day, in 2014, a neighbor in the village made them an offer. Haroldo Castillo lived just down the road. His mother told us he was known for successfully smuggling adults to the U.S. and finding them jobs. Now he was extending his offer to local teenagers.
Most unaccompanied minors come from Latin American countries. The most prominent type of NGO are Christian human rights, non-governmental organizations. However, there are strict guidelines that these groups must follow. Christian NGOs cannot discriminate to deny aid to a community that doesn't provide proselytizing opportunities, and proselytizing cannot transcend tangible physical needs. Under the United States Department of Health and Human Services and the Administration of Children and Families, the Office of Refugee Resettlement is responsible for the care of unaccompanied minors.
In our own country, we have today a lot of victims of human trafficking that are invisible to our own eyes. And let's not forget that some of them are kids. And the end of the game is to subject that person to peonage, to slavery. They're an easy prey. They're vulnerable and easy to victimize, and they're alone.
The Department of Health and Human Services procures custody of unaccompanied minors who are legally defined as anyone under 18 who has no parent or guardian in the United States and has no lawful immigration status in the U.S.
With sponsors in the United States, I thought I was going to help place children in loving homes. Instead, I discovered that children are being trafficked through a sophisticated network that begins with recruiting in home country, smuggling to the U.S. border, and ends when ORR delivers a child to a sponsor. Some sponsors are criminals and traffickers and members of transnational criminal organizations. Some sponsors view children as commodities and assets to be used for earning income.
The Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act of 2008 expanded the responsibilities of the Department of Health and Human Services and made the care given to an unaccompanied minor more holistic. When a child enters into the Office of Refugee Resettlement, the employees attempt to contact the child's parents, guardians, or relatives, and then begin trying to find a sponsor to take the child in.
To the U.S., most were detained by the Border Patrol. At the time, the boys were among tens of thousands of unaccompanied minors from Central America who were fleeing violence and poverty and coming to the U.S. in record numbers. They were turned over to the Department of Health and Human Services, whose job it was to place them with a relative or an adult sponsor.
Sponsors are vetted to identify risk factors and safety concerns. They must complete a background check. They must complete the sponsor assessment process and pass a home study.
An adult sponsor. But HHS was overwhelmed and began to relax their standards for vetting.
First, the federal government decided to stop fingerprinting most of these sponsors who were coming in to claim children. And then, over a period of months later, they decided to stop requiring that sponsors submit original or certified copies of their birth certificates. And then finally, they stopped requiring FBI criminal background checks for many sponsors.
The sponsor must bring the minor to all pending migration proceedings. The goal is to reunite the child with family or to find a safe sponsor as fast as possible and to provide follow-up services.
Minors have been released. I saw sponsors trying to simultaneously sponsor children from multiple ORR sites at one time. I saw sponsors using multiple addresses to obtain sponsorships of children. And I saw numerous cases of children in debt bondage, and the child knew they had to stay with the sponsor until the debt was paid.
There have been a number of bills passed that lay out the guidelines for immigration and how to care for unaccompanied minors. In 1980, the Refugee Act passed, which included the STAR, or Support for Trauma-Affected Refugees program. This act created the Office of Refugee Resettlement. The ORR's mission, as explained in the bill, is, quote, to promote the health, well-being, and stability of refugees, unaccompanied alien children, and other eligible individuals and families through culturally responsive, trauma-informed, and strengths-based services. Our vision is for all the new arrivals to be welcome with equitable, high-quality services and resources so they can maximize their potential.
Fairplex. I saw vulnerable indigenous children from Guatemala who speak Mayan dialects and cannot speak Spanish. That means they cannot ask for help in English, they cannot ask for help in Spanish. They become captives of their sponsors.
The Flores Settlement Agreement of 1997 lays out that detention centers must meet health, safety, and well-being standards. People may not be detained for prolonged periods of time, and children must be treated humanely, and, in 2016, was extended to children and their parents who are fleeing with them. The Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act of 2008 grants special protections for unaccompanied immigrant children, including screenings for trafficking risks and procedures to expedite release to members of their family or sponsors.
Castillo took advantage of the chaos. He had accomplices in Ohio, waiting to pose as sponsors for the boys. So in the summer of 2014, HHS began releasing the teens, and they were brought to Ohio, to trailers owned by Castillo.
The Immigration Court Efficiency and Children's Court Act of 2023 establishes the Children's Court to improve the adjudication of immigration cases involving unaccompanied migrant children. The Safeguarding Endangered Children, Unaccompanied and at Risk of Exploitation Act of 2023 was created in response to reports that approximately 85,000 unaccompanied minors, quote, who crossed the U.S. southern border were released from federal custody and with whom subsequent contact has been lost.
Cases in which multiple children were placed with sponsors in homes where they were subject to human trafficking, sexual abuse, and other severe forms of abuse and exploitation. More than 180,000 unaccompanied minors have been placed in communities across the country. But because there's so little follow-up with them once they're out of the government's care, we have no idea what's happened to them.
According to the Congressional Research Service, 75 to 80% of unaccompanied minors at the U.S.-Mexico border are victims of human trafficking. This bill was meant to help solve this issue. These kids do have access to specific visas and special immigrant juvenile status to aid if they are victims of crimes, trafficking, abandonment, or neglect. But are these numbers accurate? Experts have accused U.S. officials of distorting statistics and inflating claims that kids have been lured into sex trafficking and forced labor.
Undocumented workers.
The plant was raided several times throughout several years, and no one looked into human trafficking. No one looked into exploitation of workers.
Sonia Paras represented some of the workers. They told her they had been recruited from Mexico, gone into debt, and were being threatened when they complained.
It wasn't until we started unraveling all these multi-layers of victimization that we realized that some of these victims were also victims of human trafficking.
According to an August 2024 Department of Homeland Security report, 32,000 unaccompanied minors failed to show up for court dates from 2019 to 2023. A large percentage of those who didn't show up didn't receive court notices. There is a higher risk for exploitation if children don't make it to their court dates. According to Aaron Reichlin-Melnick, policy director at the American Immigration Council, kids have missed court dates, not gone missing. Exploitation concerns are valid, but not all of those kids are actually missing. The ultimate issue is that the government isn't following through to find them.
More alarming is that a U.S. government agency was actually responsible for delivering some of the victims into the hands of the abusers.
How could the federal government take these kids in, try to protect them, and then as they send them out to families, pending a court date, give them right back to the people who had brought them up here?
Here's one of those.
Even with representation, many migrants are apprehensive to go to immigration hearings and are even scared to call the police to report emergencies. Will ICE be around in these situations?
One of the teens managed to call his uncle in Florida. The uncle agreed to talk to us, but was afraid to show his face on camera.
Y cuando mi sobrino me llamó, me dijo que al señor pues le había dicho a mi sobrino que si no cumples con tu deuda, a tu papá le voy a ir a dar unos 2 o 3 plomazos. Él estaba asustado y él estaba preocupado, llorándome a mí, llamándome que yo luchara yo por él. Entonces yo le dije que sí, yo voy a tratar la manera. Entonces yo tuve que hablar con el sheriff.
One day I received a phone call. There was a gentleman that had a nephew that had been smuggled into the country from Guatemala and was being kept to work against his will in Ohio. And within 24 hours, I had a conference call from the head of the FBI, HSI, and the U.S. Attorney's Office in that region.
2 months later, federal and local law enforcement moved in.
Let's talk about the missing unaccompanied minors. While there have been cases of this reported, it appears that conspiracy theorists have inflated how bad the numbers are. In an expose from the New York Times entitled Alone and Exploited, it is alleged that the Office of Refugee Resettlement, quote, could not reach 85,000 children. It is implied that these children have been forced into illegal labor by U.S. companies. Republicans seized on this, claiming the Biden administration released these children into labor and sex trafficking, and it became a QAnon theory. In March 2023, the Health and Human Services Secretary told Congress that this number is wrong. It is, in fact, U.S. policy not to track the children once they leave government custody. Officials attempt to follow up with a phone call after a month of a child living with the sponsor.
We need to revamp the vetting process of sponsors and have case managers who have investigative backgrounds, data analytics backgrounds, some certified fraud examiners. And I think we need to reimagine a system where the sponsor is the accountable party. Sponsors should be required to report to ORR. And lastly,
the best way of tracking these children is providing them with legal representation. It is the lack of legal and social services that increases the labor exploitation of minors. According to the Department of Justice, of the kids who do appear in court, only 56% are represented by counsel. The Secure Act doesn't address these key issues, according to Jennifer Nagda, Chief Programs Officer at the Young Center of Immigrants' Children's Rights at University of Pennsylvania's Law School. The bill doesn't address issues that make these kids vulnerable to trafficking, ignoring the complexity of trauma. An example of how this has played out can be seen with the film Sound of Freedom. Yes, we're getting into it. Sound of Freedom is a movie about Tim Ballard, who claimed to have saved trafficked children in high-action rescues. QAnon conspiracy theorists claim that there is a cabal of Satan-worshipping politicians and celebrities who harvest the blood of abused children. Sound of Freedom director Alejandro Monteverde denied QAnon ties to the film, but lead actor Jim Caviezel has repeated QAnon theories in the media tour. In a special message after the end credits, urging moviegoers to purchase more tickets to the film, Caviezel calls the film, quote, the 21st century version of the 1852 anti-slavery novel Uncle Tom's Cabin. But instead of putting the money into organizations to help children, we are encouraged to buy tickets to the movie. The story doesn't depict what human trafficking actually looks like. Domestic trafficking is more common, and predators can be in plain sight. Instead of children being moved in shipping containers, it is much more likely that kids are being moved via manipulation from their trafficker.
There are some things we don't see. Not because they're not there, but because we don't always understand what is right in front of us.
Valuable resources are being taken away from unaccompanied minors who have been lost in the system. In 2025, government funding began being cut for various services and nonprofit groups around the country. This funding means layoffs to staff members who now have to maintain the same amount of cases at a much smaller capacity. This not only impacted the mental health of employees who have to care for and monitor a large number of kids, but means fewer children will get assistance and resources. This will lead to children becoming more susceptible to exploitation, homelessness, and deportation. Unaccompanied minors depend on organizations for legal representation, mental health services, and family reunification support. In addition, these children are not being given access to court-appointed counsel and must face a government-funded prosecutor. This again opens up their chances for exploitation, trafficking, and a quick deportation. As of March 2025, the Trump administration ended the legal services program for unaccompanied youth, impacting around 26,000 children. Some of these nonprofit groups, however, who have continued to be federally funded, are getting rich off their government contracts. The Unaccompanied Children Program is federally funded and delegates tasks to non-governmental agencies. There are shelters in Texas, Arizona, and California. The three largest groups, Global Refugee, Southwest Key Programs, and Endeavors, Inc., made about $597 million in 2019 and $2 billion in 2022. All of the CEOs make more than $500,000 a year, and the CEO of Southwest Key makes over $1 million. With all of this money, kids are falling through the cracks.
Victims, as you know.
Yeah, the crazy part about the NGOs in America is that the taxpayers' money goes to fund those organizations, and those organizations kind of have lost control of the of the unaccompanied minors. And it has been proven that in some of those cases, there's been, in some of the holding places that they've put them into, some of the, the temporary housing has been proven to have, sexual exploits of some of these children. And also, like I said, the lack of background checks. And so proven to hand these kids over back into almost exploitation again. So it's crazy to think that the American dollar that is spent on trying to help the situation has further helped progress human trafficking in our own country. And that's just sad to hear, right? To the investigative journalist who broke that down was incredible to find out. And it was just kind of heart-wrenching to think that a system that you believed was supposed to help these unaccompanied minors was actually putting them right back into human trafficking, potentially putting them back into some human trafficking situations.
There is a lack of accountability in what the taxpayer money is being used for, and a complete lack of oversight for the Unaccompanied Children Program. The Office of Refugee Resettlement pressured case managers to move kids out of temporary emergency intake sites within 2 weeks to prepare for the next wave of kids, and sponsors were not being properly vetted. A huge number of unaccompanied minors have crossed the U.S.-Mexico border since 2019.
I think also we need to change the culture of speed over safety. Speed is the wrong performance measure when dealing with children. We need to
During that presidential term, kids were separated from their parents at the border as part of the administration's zero-tolerance policy. Kids were sent to shelters run by the Office of Refugee Resettlement, and their parents were detained or deported. As of 2025, even with ending this policy, there may still be around 1,000 kids separated from their parents. Apparently, the Office of Refugee Resettlement was not obligated to track the children after they left custody. ICE is not able to account for the minors who missed court dates as well.
Become captives of their sponsors. I have sat with case managers as they've cried to tell me the horror of what has happened to children as they make the journey to this country. I saw apartment buildings where 20, 30, and 40 unaccompanied minors have been released. I saw sponsors.
If someone doesn't come to court, federal judges issue continuances until they are left with no other choice but to issue deportation orders. Sometimes the kids who have been deemed missing are simply kids who are living with sponsors who didn't answer a phone call. The separation and prosecution of children, separate from their families, is the bigger issue. The goal in this is not keeping people safe, it's monitoring and deportation. An article from Reuters in 2022 lays out how facts can be misused or misconstrued. It was reported that dozens of unaccompanied minors are unlocated in Houston, Texas, meaning they were missing from the homes of their U.S. sponsors. Of the 57 kids reported missing, 9 had run away from a health and human services shelter, and 46 were ultimately located, with no evidence of trafficking. Some of the kids became legal adults in that time, changing how they were tracked. A false red flag pointed out is when a large number of kids were released to the sponsors at a same or similar address without actually investigating what that address is. Likely, it was an apartment complex where many immigrant families already live. The claim, without nuance and on paper, looks bad, but there are often explanations. The missing piece to all of this is seeing these children as humans who are likely traumatized and lack resources. Now, it is true that children, especially unaccompanied minors, can be exploited. We've talked about it on our channel before. In 2023, Iowa, Missouri, Ohio, and Arkansas passed a number of laws that allow companies to hire kids without working permits, let kids work longer hours and in more dangerous conditions. According to the Department of Labor, this led to a 69% increase in child labor, many of whom were undocumented minors.
For earning income, this is why we are witnessing an explosion of labor trafficking. Now, whether it's intentional or not, it could be argued that the United States government has become the middleman in a large-scale, multi-billion-dollar child trafficking operation that is run by bad actors seeking to profit off of the lives of children. As for me,
in July 2022, at a Hyundai subsidiary in Alabama, it was found that child labor was occurring at a plant that supplies car parts. Some of these kids were as young as 12 years old and didn't go to school. In February 2023, the Department of Labor found minors working for a slaughterhouse cleaning firm called Packers Sanitation Services, Inc. Over 100 children as young as 13 were working overnight jobs in 8 states, which is against company policy. These kids were using caustic chemicals to clean sharp saws. Adults recruited, hired, and supervised children. These adults tried to derail the investigation. Some of the children were unaccompanied minors. Ultimately, the company had to pay $1.5 million in fines. There are a lot of confusing stats and data around missing unaccompanied minors, as well as the weaponization of that information. We must stay vigilant and remember that protecting all children, regardless of their status in the U.S., is what is important.
To understand, this is not a small group of guys that are doing sex trafficking, human trafficking with little children, and especially little girls. This is an enormous network of people that are doing this around the world, and they are also laundering money, and they are doing political favors to each other and to other powerful people. So they create this network of protection, political protection, and judicial protection. So
Thank you for listening. Please comment, like, and subscribe. You can also check out our podcast, Fixate Today, Gone Tomorrow, for more content. Have anything you'd like us to fixate on? Reach out and let us know. Thanks for joining us. Disclaimer: we are not investigators, journalists, detectives, law enforcement, or historians. We are 2 neurodivergent ladies who just hyperfixate. Please do not take our opinions and ideas as statements of fact. All allegations are just that. We are not accusing anyone of anything, simply offering our interpretation of what we've researched.